Hi, Tricia. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second installment of our setting, or I guess it'd be our third installment of our Setting the Table YouTube series. We'll be taking the time today to learn about your organization and the work that you're doing in the region with National Park Partners. So I'd just like to start off by asking for you to just tell us a little bit about National Park Partners and a little bit about what you do.
Okay, well, we are what's commonly known as a Friends Group for our local national park. Here is Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, which includes Moccasin Bend National Archaeological District. So we provide resources for the park it's kind of a threefold: preserve, promote, and enhance. So we work to really help the park in its conservation goals. That's a big part of our mission, is to conserve the natural, historic, and cultural resources that are found in the park. That includes, of course, the Civil War stories around the campaign for Chattanooga, as well as the 12,000-year history found at Moccasin Bend from indigenous Paleo-Indian tribes that were passing through 12,000 years ago, all the way up to the villages that were there more about 600 BC, the woodland era. So we work to help preserve those critical resources, and then we really like to promote the park as an asset for the community, because under normal circumstances, this is a bit of an unusual year, to say the least, but the park on average gets about 1 million visitors a year, and they spend in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 million coming just to visit the park. And then if you add in the private sector jobs that follow, the annual economic impact is usually somewhere around $70 million every single year to our region, just from the national park. And that's a big number. And so we want to make sure people understand that not only is the park a national asset and really an international asset, as these visitors come from everywhere, but we're so blessed and fortunate to have it right here in our backyard. You know, we can go within minutes and be in our national park, and a lot of national parks are more of a destination. You really have to get there. It's kind of a journey, and ours is just in virtually every direction you look. So that's our big role, is to cheerlead the park and to help do programming and other things that connect people to the park.
Great, thank you. I love our national parks and that it's so close. Like, I go to the battlefield to run all the time, and it's just really great to see people. Like, I see license plates from all over when I'm out at the battlefield, and it's just exciting. I think it's great that it's just such a big draw for our region.
Yeah.
And so that actually ties into my first question for you. And so I guess sometimes I forget that, like, there's this 12,000-year history of, at least that we know of, or that there's some sort of documentation with Moccasin Bend. And so how do you collaborate with the National Park Rangers to promote and tell each park story?
Well, the interpretive team at the park are fantastic. We love our rangers. They do an incredible job of researching and finding these stories, you know, that span millennia, clearly, with Moccasin Bend going back 12,000 years. But they also look to find unique takes on the Civil War story, maybe connecting to humans who lived during that time, before, during, after the war. What was the Chattanooga area like during that time? And not just focus on the battles themselves, but the impact that it had on people's lives. And so one of our most popular programs that we work with the interpretive team is our recreation programs, Interpretive Recreation, and we partner with Outdoor Chattanooga on those as well. And so you can see in this photo, this is a ranger guided. You can kind of see the ranger with the cap on there, sort of in the middle. Ranger guided kayak tour that took off from Coolidge Park and paddles around McClellan Island and back, which there's some great stories there at McClellan Island too. But we do a couple of those kayak tours every year. We do some bicycle tours at Chickamauga Battlefield. There you're biking alongside a ranger, and he'll kind of stop and talk about what happened in this spot, and then you bike a little more and spend about 2 or 3 hours on the battlefield on a Saturday morning, and it's extremely popular. And then we also have a canoe tour program where you're canoeing, again, ranger guided. And so you're getting to hear these stories of the park while you're enjoying the recreational assets that Chattanooga is really known for. So we're very grateful to Outdoor Chattanooga. They provide, we sponsor the program so that it's free to the public. National Park Partners covers the cost, but Outdoor Chattanooga brings their gear so that if somebody doesn't have a kayak or a canoe or a bicycle, they're there provided for you at no cost, so that we try to make the program as accessible as possible in that regard. So that's just one way that we work with the interpretive team to connect people to the park. And they also do a lot of other programs throughout the year. For example, within the last year or two, they've done programs at Moccasin Bend regularly, where they tell different aspects of the Moccasin Bend story. They did a program recently on Orchard Knob talking about the environmental impact of the Civil War, showing, you know, as you're up on the knob, sort of these before and after photos of what Chattanooga looked like before the war and then after. And it's just like completely devoid of trees after. You can't even believe, since Chattanooga is such a tree city, that in the years immediately following the war, there were almost no trees because they used them all for burning wood and fires and things. So it's, you know, they really go the extra mile, and we try to promote those community programs and let people know that they can learn something new with our rangers in any of our park units.
That all sounds really exciting. And I feel like it's always a much more memorable experience to learn about the history of a place when it's more interactive than if you're reading something in a museum. And so I think that's really great how the parks and the rangers are getting people out and connecting with, getting people to connect with each other. So, I mean, these experiences all sound so great. Where can people go if they want to like take a tour or get on a kayak? And are they still going on even with COVID happening?
Sadly, no. We had to suspend our May and June programs, and we had a couple scheduled for July, but they around the beginning of July ended up canceling the July and August programs as well because of the rising cases here. And, you know, just erring on the side of caution. And they had already sort of amended the way that they do things with picking tours where you could launch and return to the same place instead of having to be shuttled to sort of make it as safe as possible. But yeah, I think once the sort of the renewed interest in masking and sheltering in place whenever possible became more of a thing in July, then the beginning of July, they decided to postpone the July kayak tours that we had planned. But we still do have 2 bicycle tours scheduled for September and October that we hope will be able to take place, and we are going to try to reschedule the kayak programs for September. And all of that is on our website. Those opportunities are at npp-ccm.org.
Great, thank you. Fingers crossed those get to happen.
I know. I know. But you know, it's better to be. It's fine. It's fine. There's plenty, you know, we'll do it when it's time. That's okay.
Better to err on the side of caution.
Sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned working with Outdoor Chattanooga on some of these tours. What are some other projects that you're working on with community partners in the region? And are there any ones in particular that take place out of the park boundaries, and like any particular themes or practices that you focus on?
Sure. Well, we had a partnership with the Bessie Smith Cultural Center. It was a 2-year grant-funded program to work on engaging the communities that are, you know, maybe most likely to not access the park. So it was based on creating sort of this new and diverse audiences, bringing more and more people in to feeling connected and a sense of ownership of the park. You know, that's a big theme for us, is that the national park belongs to everyone and everyone belongs in the park. There's just been a history of, in general, I think national parks across the country are recognizing the fact that they sometimes are not reaching the entire public. There can be some gaps in people using and visiting the park, and demographically speaking. And so how can we make a concerted effort to address that? So with our Bessie Smith Cultural Center project, there were 5 or 6 ranger talks over the course of 2 years. So I think there ended up being 11 or 12 total that took place inside the Bessie Smith Cultural Center, where a national park ranger would come and give a talk about an issue related to sort of this Civil War to civil rights theme. And that came out of a listening session that we had at the beginning of the program, where we invited the community to come to the Bessie Smith Cultural Center and let us know what kind of stories would you like to hear about. So those were wonderful talks that the Rangers did. And then we had a walking tour of downtown Chattanooga of historic African-American sites. And you can see in the photo, John Edwards, who is on our board. He is the publisher of the Chattanooga News Chronicle, which is the African-American newspaper here. And, you know, it's just been in it from the beginning. I mean, he's really knows a lot about the history of the civil rights movement here in Chattanooga. And so he spoke in this spot is at the intersection of Market Street and I believe 7th, East 7th, that where fire hoses were first used in Chattanooga on civil rights protesters. The walking tour was part of that program with the Bessie Smith Cultural Center. On the photo of John is on the left. On the right, you can see Chris Barr. He's one of the park rangers who researched a lot of these stops along the tour, including tying in the Trail of Tears, which of course is another major social justice story that needs to be told. And is it possible to go back to the previous slide? There we go. So on the left, you can see the larger than life. Those are Wayne White, local Chattanooga artists, created those massive puppets for a partnership event we did with the Glass House Collective. And that is up at Sherman Reservation, which of course the glass farms in East Chattanooga neighborhoods are right at the base of Missionary Ridge. And so Sherman Reservation is on the north end. And we worked with Glass House and the Southeast Conservation Corps to create a trail that goes from the base of the ridge up to Sherman Reservation. And this event that we did was sort of the ribbon cutting of the opening of that trail, but just another way to try to connect people in the community, give them another way to access. So instead of having to drive up and park on Lightfoot Mill Road and access Sherman that way, you could just walk up from the base of the ridge on this new trail that was developed. So that was a big community event. Glass House continues to be a great partner for us. This panel, Brad Bennett, the park superintendent, and John Edwards, who mentioned previously, and Marty Mitchell, who works with the Bessie Smith Cultural Center, and myself were part of a panel for last fall's placemaking conference that was focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we did the African American walking tour during that conference as sort of a mobile workshop, and then we also had this panel discussion where we talked about the 2-year program with Bessie Smith and some of these other outreach efforts that the park is making to work with community partners to address these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm part of the Public Lands Alliance, and they've recently started adding justice in there. They call it JEDI. I love it. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think that there are a lot of stories of justice that are embedded in our park. And so I'm kind of including that now into the way we think about our programming. And then the Moccasin Bend lecture series, this will be our 15th year of doing that lecture series. But we have 3 speakers every year that come, and this again takes place outside the park. This year, if we're able to, we're going to be where we were last year at the IMAX Theater with our speakers. We may be going virtual, just depending on how things are looking in the fall. But we bring in speakers to talk about issues surrounding national parks and conservation, surrounding because it's the Moccasin Bend lecture series, we definitely focus on indigenous peoples and the 22 different American Indian tribes that have a connection to Moccasin Bend. We talk about, I think one of our programs this year, the November program, is going to be looking at the United States colored troops that were formed during the Civil War, and a big one of the major troops was founded here in Chattanooga in 1863. As well as the Buffalo Soldiers, the freed slaves who volunteered to fight for the U.S. Army. And so, yes, through a lot of different programming, both in the park and outside the park, both things that we work very directly with the park on, as well as our individual programs like the lecture series. We're continually looking at ways to address those issues, the Jedi issues, as well as, you know, we certainly don't want to say, oh, the Civil War, that was just a thing, you know, like there's other stories. The Civil War was a very big part of how Chattanooga was shaped. And honestly, the reconciliation story, the fact that the veterans from the North and South met at Chickamauga battlefield 26 years after the battle, they had a meal together. They determined that the land needed to be preserved as a memorial to the soldiers who died there, and that was you know, kind of a way for them to say, this nation is still too divided. You know, we need to set the example of unity and coming together and trying to find a way forward that involves an acknowledgement of what happened, a reconciliation, and kind of a preservation effort to unify us. And, you know, if we can do it, we were shooting at each other on this land 26 years ago, literally trying to kill each other. If we can overcome that and shake hands and break bread and move forward, then maybe the rest of the country can learn from our example. So that's a pretty, you know, that's a major compelling story in and of itself. And so, yeah, there's so much. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are just a few of the ways that we try to work with community partners, because we know we can't do it ourselves. We don't want to do it ourselves. We want to listen to the community. What stories do you want to hear? You know, can we bring this program about the U.S. colored troops to free for anyone to learn about? You know, is that something that's appealing? You know, and we're just trying to find things that resonate, and there's a lot there. So we're busy all year.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got 12,000 years of history to try and cover, I feel like there's always something. I know.
Yeah, it's a lot, and thank goodness we're not the historians, right? The
Yeah.
Park Service are the experts really at digging deep and finding those stories. So our role is more of the community facilitator and the connecting of people to those stories.
That's so great. And I really like the Jedi acronym or concept. I feel like justice is something that, like, it doesn't get talked about a lot in terms of how we think about reconciliation on our lands and our communities and neighborhoods. And I definitely am going to start using that too.
Okay. Yes, feel free. I can't claim it. That was my Public Lands Alliance. Came from them, but I'm sure they would love for it to become more widely used.
Yeah, that's great. So I have, you mentioned earlier about your priority areas around preserving, promoting, and enhancing the park. And so what does that typically look like, and how do those particular priority areas play out in and outside of the park, similar to the programming that you work on?
Well, so preserving the park, we have one great program that I'll mention. There's the photo on the right. You can see one of our C4, it's our Chickamauga and Chattanooga Conservation Crew members working with the park historian Jim Ogden to build. What they did was, Jim had studied, you know, as the park historian. Hey, I'm telling you, he knows more than I'll forget ever. He researched using maps and different overlays this area on the Chickamauga battlefield called the Brotherton Farm area, and realized that one of the fences that was built there in the early years of the park was actually in the wrong place based on the maps. And so this C4 crew took down the old fence and literally learned how to split logs and create a split rail fence, and built a new fence in the more historically accurate location. So that's a partnership we have with Southeast Conservation Corps. They recruit a local high school crew, and we help fund them to spend 5 weeks every year, every summer in the park, working hand in hand with the interpretive staff, learning the history, learning these kind of skills like trail restoration and things like that. So that's one of our programs that's inside the park to help preserve. It's working on sort of preserving the historical accuracy and the natural resources that are found in the park. Then another preservation effort we have, the photo on the left, is Wilder Tower. We started a fund several years ago called the Jewel Memorial Fund for landscape and monument restoration. And this fund helps to, you know, I could get into this whole sidebar about monuments, but like, suffice it to say that if you go to the park, you will not find any busts of generals or any generals on their horse or anything that glorifies the battles. There are markers and monuments that are dedicated to unnamed soldiers. The ones that are dedicated to generals, like this tower, the Wilder Tower, is still a sort of, this is where the Wilders Brigade fought, a very pivotal part of the battle. And the tower, actually, if you can climb up to the top of it, this was one of our restoration efforts. The tower had been struck by lightning and was not accessible to the public for decades. And National Park Partners funded the restoration effort to reopen the tower, so you can go up and get that same bird's eye view that of, you know, the overlay of the battlefield as it happened during the war. And so we're very conscious of the fact that the monuments that are in the battlefield were placed by the veterans, again, the blue and the gray, together. They marked the battlefield of where the different regiments fought. They say on them how many casualties, the dates that they were fighting, the exact date that they fought. There might be a plaque alongside it that talks about, you know, the different makeup of that brigade, of it was this many troops from Illinois and this many from Indiana and so forth. So they're really historical in nature, and they are meant to serve as markers and memorials and nothing more. And so we were very careful to distinguish the fact that of when and why and how they were placed versus monuments that came much later that maybe served a different purpose, that was not to provide a historical memorial of a battle, but rather to glorify one side or the other kind of thing. So we believe in helping support the restoration of these monuments because they were placed very early on in the creation of the park. Most of them are more than 100 years old and were built at a time when the materials and the methods are different than they are now. So we developed this fund to help the park try to maintain the historical accuracy of these markers as they appear on the battlefield. And so that is one of our preservation efforts. So preserve and then promote. I've talked already about how we like to talk about the visitation. There were 29 different states that had involved in the fighting of the campaign for Chattanooga. So a lot of people from those 29 states will come. I think that leads a lot to the visitation, but also Chickamauga is really known as one of the most pivotal battles in the war, and really the whole campaign for Chattanooga. Whoever won Chattanooga was going to win the wars. No less than Abraham Lincoln said that himself, and he turned out to be right because the U.S. Army was successful in keeping hold of Chattanooga, and really the Confederate Army was never able to recover from their defeat and launch any significant attacks in the North after that. So we really try to promote the park as widely as we can. We work with a lot of different community groups like the Regional Planning Agency. We've been involved in the task force for relocating the firing range away from Moccasin Bend. we involve ourselves in a lot of these different community-based efforts to make sure that people are thinking of the park. I serve on the board of the Chattanooga Tourism Company. Obviously, there's a big tourism draw for the park, and so that we're kind of keeping that voice of the park at the table on behalf of the park is the way we promote. And then enhancing through all of these different programs, and we sit down with the park at the beginning of every year and create a work plan, an annual work plan that talks about the different projects and programs we're going to work on together, and some things that the park could use some extra funding for. It's really amazing when you think about the fact that they maintain over 9,000 acres, 30 staff. They receive these million visitors. They do these tour programs and all of the things that they do throughout the year on a budget that's just about $3 million, and hasn't gone up, hasn't changed very much in a long time. And so that's incredibly lean. Let's say it that way. They do a lot with not, with their limited resources. And so anything we can do to help enhance those resources, improve the visitor experience so that when people are there, they have a great experience and they go back and tell their friends, and we kind of just continue to cultivate this, ambassadors for the park through the enhancements to the visitor experience, enhancements to the ability for the park to be able to connect to the community. That's really important to us, and engaging all the generations. There's something for everybody to learn, even if they've been in Chattanooga their whole life and they're 80 years old and they think they know all about the park. I promise you they can find something new, and definitely engaging the new generations who are going to be the stewards of the park in the future is really important to us as well. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
That's great. I mean, there's just, I said it earlier, but just so much going on, and you do so much at your organization, and I just think it's incredibly admirable, and that I feel as though we know the park is an asset, but then collectively I don't think we know how much of an asset it is for our region, from both the economic impact perspective, but then also just from the historical significance of Chattanooga and the Chattanooga region, and just the impact it's had on the history of our country and in our, so I just love what you do. It's so great.
Well, thank you. I love it too. I feel very fortunate to be in this line of work in particular. I've been involved in conservation for many years, but I as well didn't realize until I started working with National Park Partners. I had no idea the full scope of what the park offers in terms of resources. There's just so much, and we've got to. We definitely need to keep working on spreading those stories far and wide.